In our first year here, we heard a story about it was a cloistered convent that used to have a man that would come and drop stuff off and help them out with material things. And he would get usually talking to one of the sisters, just really kind of small talk, and then they kind of established a friendship. And the sister knew that he was an atheist, and he also said it as well. He wasn't aggressive about it, and he wasn't kind of mocking, he just didn't believe. And she would continue the conversations. And at some point, he came back and he had had an encounter with somebody else, and he'd been asked to enter into the church. And so he just wanted to go back to the convent and kind of share that news that he was going to be getting formation, and he was convinced and he was going to enter into the church. He had a change of heart. And the sister couldn't believe it. She was completely taken aback. And then at some point in the conversation, he asked her, he said, "How come you never spoke to me about Jesus?" And it was a massive examination of conscience for her, because, I mean, understandably, she was kind of trying to maybe work on a natural level, maybe philosophical or human, which we all do that. Like, I mean, we all kind of sometimes try to assess the situation and see how we can, whatever, get a foot in. I'm not like condemning this sister, saying like, oh, how could she do that? I mean, I put myself in the same position, and I see myself receiving those words from that guy as well. I'm not like saying that. I'm just saying that it's a wake-up call. How come you never spoke to me about Jesus? And she was a nun. And so, like, when, after he would have left, whatever, how she must have sat with that, like, my whole life is dedicated to God. I'm a religious sister. And this guy converts and, is an atheist and whatever. And he comes back and he asks me, how come I never spoke to him about Jesus? It's so, like I said, this is something for all of us. It's something we all have to take into heart and not judge the poor nun. But we read in Deuteronomy today, after Moses gives them the decrees and the statutes, and basically just laying down the law of life. If you live this, you'll live. If you don't, you'll die. And he says, take care and be earnestly on your guard. So be extremely vigilant, be careful, not to forget the things which your own eyes have seen, nor let them slip from your memory as long as you live. So what you've experienced, what you've heard, and what you've seen, be extremely vigilant. It's almost like on a daily basis to remember who you are, what you've seen, and what you've heard. We had a beautiful encounter recently in a retreat with 16-year-old boys. One of the boys said at the end of the retreat, he was talking to one of the brothers, and he said, your faith is so convincing. Basically, he's saying, you're so convinced in what you believe that it convinces me. And I mean, the lad, he's a smart lad, and he thinks and he reads a lot. But whatever would have been going on in his head during the retreat, during the things that the brothers were saying or what they were doing, we never know what we can be transmitting or what we can be giving, because a lot of people will say God doesn't exist or they don't believe in God because they can't see them. And as we read the priest said in our office, it's the same thing as like if a blind person would just to start saying like the sun doesn't exist, you're all crazy. And he starts talking about how like it's impossible for the sun to exist. And somebody who's not blind can listen to him and he can feel bad for him, but he lives and he experiences it because he has his eyes open and he can see the sun. And this church father was saying the same thing happens in the soul. A lot of people don't see God because sin is blinding. It's one of the first effects of sin. Sin blinds you. So the amount of people, young people that are walking around completely blinded, they have to somehow be getting it from us. So like we have to somehow be shining and becoming so bright that it can break through. Like in the case of this lad, he said, "You're so convinced of your faith. It's convincing, and it's beautiful, and it's a reminder because we're constantly being reminded to guard earnestly and not let this slip from our memory. Everything that we've lived, seen, and heard, and we need to teach them, and we always have to be teaching so that they might not accuse us, how come you never spoke to me about Jesus? Or how come you never spoke to me about your faith? And maybe give us a bit of a wake-up call to use the human instrument and to use what the Lord's given us, but always to bring it to the divine and never end in just like a human kind of way of bringing the gospel, so that those who've never heard him or never seen him may hear and see him in us. Amen.